Hello and welcome to the Savage Movie Night podcast. Today we are talking all about the 1992 Robin Williams movie Toys. I'm your idiotic fail son, annoying all those around him with his man-child antics as they just try and do their jobs. Host Adam. Joining me, as always, is my living embodiment of the annoyance a shopper would be feeling being unwittingly used to focus test crappy novelty toys co-host Kristen. Hi, Kristen.
Hey, Adam, how you doing?
Good. And of course, the show is never complete without our ghost of LL Cool J's head before he discovered the supplement aisle co-host, Rob. Hi, Rob.
Hey there. How's it going, Adam Sandler?
You know, my friends, one of my friends' young daughters will call me Adam Sandler or Adam Sandwich or many things that are not Adam Savage.
Close enough.
Yeah. So the question for part one of this month's episode is, what is your guys' history with the movie Toys and more broadly, Barry Levinson?
So I had not really even heard of Toys until we brought this up to watch. I obviously am aware of Robin Williams, but I've seen a lot of different movies with him in it, but not Toys. So this was completely new to me. But I had to look up Barry Levinson to see what his movies even were, because I was like, I couldn't even think of any. And from looking at that list, it looks like the only one that I actually have seen is this mockumentary horror movie called The Bay. I was like aware of ones like Good Morning Vietnam. Like when I was looking at the list, I had heard of some of the movies, but of actually ones I've seen are now just Toys and The Bay.
Nothing on Toys for me, but Rain Man and Good Morning Vietnam are two films by Barry that I'm familiar with that I like too.
Yeah. Now, did you ever see The Natural growing up?
Yes. Oh, that's right. Okay, that's a great movie. I didn't even realize that was one of his as well.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's the thing. He is such a chameleon that, you know, we'll talk about that. But I mean, like, he's done close to 25 movies. His 25th movie will come out in 2025. And, you know, so many of them, like, there's not one unifying thing about them. So, you know, it can be very easy to not realize something's a Barry Levinson movie. Like, you know, like later in his career, post Toys, like he did Sphere, which is based on a Michael Crichton book, or Sleepers, or, you know, Bandits, or, you know, Jimmy Hollywood, like, and like Kristen said, The Bay, you know, and so, you know, it's, you know, there are times you don't, like, you know, Rob with The Natural, you just don't realize that's a Barry Levinson film. I mean, there are some that definitely fit into a category, like, okay, that's clearly him, like some of his more personal works, but, you know.
Well, yeah, I guess that's a good thing. 25 movies in.
Yeah. Well, and that's not including made-for-TV movies, which he's done, TV series, you know, stuff like that. Like, we'll get into it, but I mean, he is a busy boy. You know, especially as he's now in his 80s. You know, for me, I had probably, because I was a bit of a weird kid, I had probably already seen Good Morning Vietnam and Rain Man before I saw Toys, even though I saw Toys in theaters when I would have been nine and a half when that movie came out. And like, I was excited to see it in theaters. We'll talk about some of the things I ended up not seeing in theaters at the same time that I could have, which makes it an even weirder choice for a 9-year-old, you know, but I don't think I made the connection that it was Barry Levinson until later. I knew of The Natural growing up, but I didn't watch it, you know, and that was the same way with a lot of his other films outside of, you know, these three. You know, that I knew of Diner, I knew of Tin Men, The Natural, you know, I knew of Bugsy. I did see Sleepers sometime not long after it came out. I think I saw Sphere, Bandits, which is Billy Bob Thornton and Bruce Willis and Kate Blanchett, based off an Elmore Leonard novel. And then I really lost track of what he did later in his career. I only heard Kristen of the Bay as I was doing research for this. A lot of the research I pulled from was a really fascinating interview he did around the time that movie came out with the Directors Guild of America. Bob Bablin interviewed him, and so I got a lot of information from that.
Yeah,
But
it's a really interesting film.
Yeah,
Sure.
no, I mean, just hearing him describe it was really interesting, and I'm sure we'll get into more details, about that in part two. But
But for now,
yeah, so I think we all have kind of a mix of, but none of us were like Levinson experts coming into this. I am much more well versed in Levinson, now after writing this script, and hopefully you guys will be too after we, go through this. So, on today's episode, we will learn how Russia was getting our classified military secrets in the days before social media, why the bad guy from Action Jackson is here, and most importantly, what happens after video kills the radio star. Because today we're talking all about the 1992 Robin Williams movie Toys. But first, a word from our sponsors. This month, we are spotlighting No Regrets, the music and spirit of Billie Holiday, an in-depth 13-episode radio and live streaming series celebrating Billie Holiday's extraordinary musical legacy. The program explores her early life, groundbreaking singing style, and the powerful impact of Strange Fruit on the civil rights movement. Produced by the award-winning Steve Robinson and written by 2024 NEA Jazz Grandmaster Willard Jenkins, No Regrets is narrated by Rhonda Hamilton. The series features interviews with Angela Davis, Cassandra Wilson, Beth Roars, Andromeda Touré, Phil Schaap, Dan Morgenstern, and many more. No Regrets, the music and spirit of Billie Holiday will be airing and live streaming on NPR stations across the country in 2025. Be sure to follow Savage Content at Savage CNTNT on social media to stay up to date on station availability and air times. Thanks so much to Savage Content and No Regrets, the music and spirit of Billie Holiday, for sponsoring today's show. And now, back to the episode. The story of the production of Toys is the story of co-writer, producer, and director Barry Levinson. Toys was his passion project, starting with its conception in the late 1970s, and he fought and kept the project alive until finally getting it made and released in 1992. And we could stop there. But just who is Barry Levinson? Why did he have to fight to get the project made? How did he end up with enough clout in Hollywood to get it made? And most importantly, why is it so very much what it is? To answer all that, let's dive into Barry and his history. Barry Levinson was born in 1942 and raised in the Forest Park section of Baltimore, a city that his work will return to again and again throughout his career. His family were hard-working middle-class Jews and would also become a recurring source of material over the years. His father owned and operated an appliance store, and he said the one thing he knew he didn't want to be growing up was working in his father's store. Barry has said that in part, his interest in film and television came from being sickly in his adolescence and spending a lot of time in the hospital watching TV. He credited this experience with exposing him to classic films he otherwise would have had no access to growing up. He wasn't a great student, but eventually found himself studying broadcast journalism at American University in Washington, D.C. This led to him interning at a local TV station and working a variety of jobs there and at another local station. At the time, he was doing it out of an interest and passion and not a particular set career path in mind. He worked as an assistant and technical director until they offered to make him a director, which didn't seem interesting. Keeping in mind that directing for television, especially not like directing true television shows, is a little different than directing feature film or television shows. So he switched to promotions, which gave him the freedom to go out and execute lots of ideas and try things. He was so successful they wanted to make him the head of the department, but that would have meant no longer doing the work he found enjoyable. He decided to quit and head to LA with no real plan in mind of what he wanted to do with his life.
Well, obviously, it's not great that he was sick a lot of his childhood, but it is nice that he got to have that experience of discovering this love for TV and film and actually wanting to pursue it in some way.
Yeah, well, especially as, he was born in 1942, so the period he describes as being sickly would have been the very late 40s into the early 50s. Um, you know, so probably, or actually the early to mid 50s, because I think he said, it started when he was like around 10 or so and lasted until he was about 14. And so, uh, that's the very early days of television, but it's also pre-home movies, streaming, no VHS, no DVD. So the only way to see a classic film at the time before television was for it to be re-released in theaters, and then to go see it there. Television offered a new opportunity to see movies you might not have otherwise seen, but they were also typically on during the day when Barry would have otherwise been at school. So he, being in the hospital, he was able to see these things and gain an appreciation for them.
Right. It's very cool.
You know?
Even though the circumstances are not great, still good for the path that it brought him to.
Yeah. Well, and it's very interesting. There's some parallels between him and George Lucas as well, because one of the main driving forces in George Lucas's life was he did not want to take over the family business. He did not want to end up living the same life as his father. And so, to see that being a reoccurring theme is also kind of interesting. And
right.
Yeah, well, and so I mentioned, that he also, did, the TV work, and the promotions was he would like go out and make these promotional films just on his own and film them and edit them. And he didn't know it at the time because he wasn't working to that, but it was a great, kind of training program to be a film director. But, like I said, they wanted to make him the head of the department, which would have meant managing people and not actually doing the work. And, he found that less interesting. And as soon as he knew that was a ceiling in his professional growth, he was like, I'm not even going to keep doing this, and struck out on his own. In LA, Barry found himself living with a roommate in Manhattan Beach in the late 1960s. One day, the roommate George asks for a ride to an acting class in Hollywood that George wanted to check out as he was considering joining. Barry agreed and they made the drive. Levinson was initially just going to wait in the car as he had no interest in acting. But George cajoled him, telling him it was silly to just sit in the car. Once inside, Barry found the whole thing fascinating and wanted to continue observing the class. But the instructor was clear. The only way he could observe the class was by joining. So he and George joined the class, making the drive every day, hanging out in the car and talking. But after a few months, George started to lose interest, whereas Barry was getting more and more involved. Eventually, Barry moved to Hollywood to be closer to the school and the connections he was making. He lost touch with George, and for years he would tell this story of how he started to break into the business with no idea of what happened to George, and George had no idea what happened to his friend Barry. We'll leave George here, but don't forget about him, because we will learn what he got up to. Barry himself started an improv team with fellow actor Craig T. Nelson, and the two of them, along with Rudy DeLuca, who may or may not have been part of the team, it's not super clear from the stuff I could find, started writing for shows with super creative names like The Tim Conway Show, The Marty Feldman Comedy Spectacular, and The Carol Burnett Show. Quickly, Craig left to focus on acting. whereas Barry was more interested in writing, but did want to transition from sketch writing to theatrical work. His break came on the set of The Carol Burnett Show when producer Ron Clark approached Levinson and DeLuca. He told them that he, Clark, was going to have a lunch meeting with Mel Brooks to pitch him an idea with them, Levinson and DeLuca, as the writers. Barry and Rudy laughed, thinking the whole thing was a bit. And even if Ron was serious, Mel, who they had never met but was a major star at that point, would never agree. During lunch, they got a phone call from Ron saying Mel was on board and wanted to meet them so they could get started. This began the process of working with Brooks every day for the next roughly 3 years on his next two films, Silent Movie, 1976, and High Anxiety, 1977, the latter of which also included an acting role from Levinson in a memorable scene as a bellboy parodying Psycho.
What were those two movies? Wait, there's two movies there that I just don't even recognize at all.
Silent Movie and High Anxiety. So Silent Movie, they're both Mel Brooks movies. They're both good. Silent Movie is basically what it says on the box. It's a love letter done in the mid-'70s to silent movies. And, it's got a lot of the regular Mel Brooks people like Marty Feldman, who you know as the bug-eyed actor who plays Igor in Young Frankenstein. And it's got Dom DeLuise, and it's got Burt Reynolds and a number of other people. But I mean, it's pretty much all silent, except I think there's one line said out loud, and it's done by Marceau, the famous French mime, if I remember correctly, which is kind of the joke in and of itself. And then High Anxiety is his love letter to Alfred Hitchcock. Which is why there's a Psycho bit making fun of Psycho in it. And it's very good. It's, again, got a lot of his regulars. It's got Madeline Kahn. It's got Cloris Leachman and Harvey Korman.
Oh, yeah, familiar cast. I thought I knew a lot of I thought I knew all the Mel Brooks movies. I wasn't familiar with those two.
Yeah. Those are two of the ones that are less well remembered. The 12 Chairs, which I think might be his best movie, is also in that category. But this High Anxiety, Hitchcock actually saw High Anxiety, that he did a screening with Mel, and he complimented Mel on his attention to detail and just making a good movie. He made some joke about how many shower curtain rings there actually were in Psycho versus how many Mel had in High Anxiety. But then later on he sent over a bottle of champagne and, told him congratulations on making such a great film, so, well, and Rob, because you're, growing up in the 70s, did you watch anything like The Carol Burnett Show or anything like that at all?
I think I caught it on the reruns in the early 80s. Not quite that old.
I know. But I mean, I saw Gilligan's Island in reruns too. But
I mean, even I saw Gilligan's Island, guys. It's been on for ages.
Oh, yeah. Well, I mean, that was especially because I grew up without cable when I was a kid. And so, there would be times you're just watching stuff because you're waiting for cartoons and it's not a soap opera. So that's how most of my Gilligan's Island viewing came from. Like, it's not a soap opera and I am waiting for cartoons.
I gotta say, Barry, he's got some luck. I mean, Mel Brooks doesn't really know the guy, and he's like, I want this guy to work with him. I mean, I know we talked about like he's had a little bit of experience under his belt, but he hasn't had any big thing. So for him to get this gig with Mel Brooks is a big deal, and I think it really helps with the rest of trajectory of his career.
Yeah.
No, I agree. Yeah. And listening to you, I wanted to reiterate what Kristen's saying. Is it's also like it's like a dream come true. Like, I just want to quit my job, move to LA, and then everything just starting to line up.
Yeah, well, I mean, like and quit my job, go to LA. It's like, okay, I guess I'll just, dabble in acting, but I'm not really an actor, but I'm good enough that, because Craig T. Nelson, we mentioned him, like that dude is a legit actor. Like Rob and I especially know him. He was on Coach, which was a sitcom in the late 80s, early 90s that was very successful. He's also been in a ton of movies, like he's the bad guy in Action Jackson. He was the dad in Poltergeist, which, did you ever see the original Poltergeist, Kristen?
Yeah, of course.
Yeah. So he's the dad in that. He's, in like Private Benjamin, but younger audiences will know him as the voice of Mr. Incredible in The Incredibles. So super long career. I had no idea he had this connection to Barry until I started going through this. And then, that just randomly, the producer of the Carol Burnett show has this idea that he wants to pitch to Mel. He doesn't want Mel to write it. He doesn't want to write it himself. He wants these two guys who are on his staff to write it. I mean, it's, and then that 3 years with Mel kind of became like another apprenticeship, because like a lot of times in a situation like this, they would just write the script and be done. But like they were with Mel every day, every step of the way throughout the process. So they wrote the script. They then went through pre-production with him. They were on set with him to make any changes, but that also meant they were seeing how he did setups, how he took care of everything, and then they were with him every bit of post-production, seeing how he cut the film, all that kind of stuff. And, throughout all this, from, doing the TV shows, from doing these movies with Mel, they're also making connections, with industry people, and that will probably, play into the story as we go on. But yeah, no, it's incredibly, breaks that, no one should ever count on.
Right.
So it was in this time that he met his future first wife, Valerie Curtin, at the Comedy Store. Valerie, the cousin of early SNL star Jane Curtin, was an actress and writer who was part of the LA improv scene and had written for the Mary Tyler Moore Show. The couple married in 1975 and began working on scripts together as well. The first produced was 1979's And Justice for All, starring Al Pacino and directed by Norm Jewison. And Barry's old friend, Craig T. Nelson, had a supporting role as well, and was quickly followed by Inside Moves in 1980, which was directed by Richard Donner. It is around this time that the idea for toys originated, as the earliest scripts are from December 14th, 1979. Barry has said that two ideas came together to create the film. The first was a story about a toy maker who had made a toy sub so accurate the Soviets used the toy to learn US military secrets. The story made him start to think about the militarization of toys and how that might corrupt innocence and indoctrinate children. The other idea was the contrast of brightly colored black comedy. Black comedy refers to the tone and humor of the movie touching on dark or bleak aspects, but this often results in movies that are lit and shot just as dark as the material. Levinson thought it would be interesting to set a dark comedy in a seemingly bright and happy place like a toy factory. This all led to Barry and Valerie writing a spec script about toys being turned into military weapons. The spec script was purchased by 20th Century Fox, and they were going to allow Levinson to make his directorial debut with the feature. But 6 weeks before they were scheduled to begin production in April of 1980, Fox saw a changeover in leadership. Suddenly, all the people who had approved the project were gone, and the new regime killed the film. Instead of toys, Levinson would go on to write and direct Diner, a personal tale about friends in Baltimore meeting up at the diner they frequent late at night.
Man, that's a lot.
Yeah.
That's a lot has developed very quickly, and now that he's in the boys' club, things are really opening up.
Yeah, well, I mean, again, we talked, when we were talking about what we knew about Barry at the start, about him being such a chameleon. And Justice for All is a movie I've known, most of my life. I've never actually seen it, but always been aware of it. And the title has always stood out. It's also the title of a Metallica album, but I had no idea again that Barry had written that. So he's starting to make these connections. I found it, fun little coincidence that Valerie, his first wife Valerie, was related to Jane Curtin, who was one of the original Saturday Night Live cast members, and also on, Rob talking about reruns we watched growing up. She was on Kate and Allie.
I don't even. I'm not familiar with that show, but
that was a
definitely
sitcom from the 80s. It was her and was it maybe Susan St. James was the other one? I can't remember which one was Kate and which one was Allie, but it was basically like two single moms end up living together, and with their kids, and it becomes a whole sitcom thing. It was around the same time as like Who's the Boss?
I think I was watching the A-Team at that time.
Yeah, well, Rob, again, I saw it on reruns because, again, okay, cartoons aren't on. This is what I've got.
Speaking of cartoons, it feels like the idea of toys easily could have been a cartoon where he got the idea from, and it happened in an episode of a cartoon.
Yeah.
Well, but keep in mind, so cartoons, especially cartoons for kids, changed drastically around 1983 or so. That prior to that, 82, I guess. Prior to that, there had been a lot of regulation on what you could present to children and how you could advertise to children. But the Reagan administration deregulated all that. And so suddenly programs that would essentially be considered just 90-minute toy commercials were now allowed. And so that's how you get things like He-Man and the Masters of the Universe and G.I. Joe and Transformers. And not only are they giant commercials, but they also tend to be a lot more action-based and military-based than previous generations' cartoon shows. And so this is as much about the idea that a a toy designed for children is so accurate that the Russians are able to learn military secrets from them. And that, that idea of how we are pushing militarization on kids, which, similar to G.I. Joe and Rambo, which would have its own cartoon show, that was a big thing happening as we moved from the 70s into the 80s.
War Games, 1983.
Oh yeah. Well, Short Circuit and all that kind of
Could
stuff.
be here all day, probably naming them all. Outlawed
Yeah.
for the time. And it's such an interesting concept for a film. And I think like it's something that I had not even fathomed before we started watching this movie. And it's like such a unique premise. But unfortunately, we were just talking in the previous section about how he has good luck. There is one moment where he's knocked down by Hollywood a bit because he doesn't get to make it until the 90s. So he's kind of he balances that out.
Yeah, but I mean, like, it's insane that he even got that close to doing it in the first place. Because
Right.
I mean, like, this is not a simple film. Like Diner is is very much a first-time director's film. It's what you would expect a first-time director to do. Toys because while the first script is from 1979, and there are a couple scripts from the mid 80s, I believe, like one or two from there, and then you have the final film. Not a ton changes. Like, there are a few things that change between 79, like a few characters get added or slightly altered from 79 to the mid 80s, and then they get refined a bit from the mid 80s to the final. But overall, the general idea of what they're trying to tell is still there. And so, without giving spoilers away about what we're going to talk about when we go through the movie itself, that it still would have had a ton of complexity. It's also interesting to try and imagine how they would have done it from a technical standpoint. because technical limitations were different in 1979 versus 1992, and he also would have had a much smaller budget. So,
Yeah, I think
in
that's
many
really what it
ways,
is, the budget.
in many ways it worked out for him. But I also just love the idea, because those of us who grew up through the Iraq War will recognize the phrase regime change. And so I like the idea that someone went in and was like toppling statues of, previous Fox executives and like doing Operation, 20th Century Fox Freedom, something like that.
You can you could swap out the that war for any other war in any other previous decades.
Yeah. So, well, but I just meant like that was one where we were explicitly using the phrase, we're trying to institute a regime change and stuff like that. And so, just a funny way to picture that happening in the corporate world.
No, for sure. Thinking of Central America.
Oh, go read about Guatemala and what bananas did to it.
Regime change, yes.
Oh, Uncle Dwight Eisenhower. Anyway, so Barry goes on, gets even though, and again, talking about his luck, he gets shut down from doing this other film, but immediately has another project lined up and is able to make it happen.
I'm sorry, but what's bizarre to me, I mean, we're obviously talking about someone who's very successful and had a very successful career. But what's really, I'm doing this from LA, and I live in a city where right now there's so much of the industry, having a hard time, and mostly it's people who are just 9-to-5ers, just middle class people trying to make it work, and hearing so many stories of people who didn't get the first paragraph of the story of that represents his life. It's like, wow, it's such a big discrepancy.
Well, and some of it is just he must have radiated skill and presence, because like you look at Diner is filled with names today, or film people know today, in terms of the actors. It's got Kevin Bacon. It's got Mickey Rourke. It's got Daniel Stern, who a lot of people know from the Home Alone movies, but has been in a ton of stuff. It's got Paul Reiser. It's got Ellen Barkin. It's got all these people before they were really anybody. And so that's his eye for spotting talent as well, and attracting people and knowing how to use them. So but you also realize everything has to go right. You have to have the opportunities. You have to have the skill. You have to have, all these dominoes have to go in a row, and like if anyone, like if, he doesn't, even if he meets Ron Clark, but doesn't make the right impression, the dominoes don't fall the right way. And, suddenly he doesn't have the career he has. And talking about breaks, even before Diner came out, in January of 1982, a few months before the release of Diner, Toys was listed among films planned for production in the coming years by CBS Theatrical Films. So even before he'd had any success, he was already potentially going to be making this film again. The project never went anywhere, and Levinson continued his career as a director with The Natural in 1984, Young Sherlock Holmes in 1985, Good Morning Vietnam 1987, and Tin Men also 1987. While those projects had varying degrees of critical and financial success, and Young Sherlock Holmes includes the first fully rendered human CGI animation in a movie, and is just a fun little adventure movie. That's another one of his I forgot to mention at the top, that I'd probably seen around this time, or a little after seeing Toys. It was 1988's Rain Man that put Barry on top of the world. The picture became the highest grossing film of 1988 and won Best Picture, Best Director for Levinson, and Best Actor for Dustin Hoffman at the Academy Awards. It was when he watched the ceremony on TV that Barry's old friend George learned what happened to his former roommate. It would take Barry many more years to learn what happened to George, and will take all of us until part 2. With his immense success, Barry wanted to make toys finally happen. Even when working on other projects, he'd still been trying to push the film forward. Levinson had worked with Robin Williams on the hit Good Morning Vietnam and gained the star's interest in toys, with it being reported in January of 1988 that Williams was considering playing the lead. Even with the star attached and Levinson's newfound weight behind it, it took until 1990 for Fox to approve the project with a $20 million budget. Pre-production took longer than expected, forcing Barry to first direct the film Bugsy before jumping back to toys. Production design was handled by Fernando Scarafiati, who drew inspiration from Dadaism, Modernism, Italian Futurism, and most importantly, the work of Belgian surrealist artist René Magritte. The process took over a year and multiple stages at Fox in Los Angeles.
It has a very, very impressive, set design. When you watch this film, it hits you. The big open spaces. Some of it is at times a little bit complex, at least mechanically, or the way it's kind of put together. But a lot of open spaces, and I tend to notice a little echo in the voices as well, audio wise. It kind of makes you feel like you're. I don't know, kind of in the world and caught in this big place.
Mm-hmm. Well, and like if you ever look up René Magritte, you see like at times it's almost like plagiarism, like with how direct they are to the inspiration. Like where they are just recreating some of his work almost one for one.
Well, where does the minimalism come from? Is that René, or is it from another?
I don't know if I mentioned minimalism. I said Dadaism, modernism, and Italian futurism. So
I don't know enough about this terminology in the art world, but when I say minimalism, like there are some very simple kind of, but big sets.
Yeah. No, I get that. I think some of that just comes in from that as a way to make things, in some ways, by making things more simple, you can make them more weird in a sense, because that was a lot of what they were going for was, some of it was, using the space to create feelings.
Yeah, I did notice one thing that in some of those big spaces where and there's characters in them, if you look at it a certain way, it kind of looks like you're looking into a big dollhouse, and the humans are just another character doll in the dollhouse.
And that was obviously very deliberate, and even referenced because, we'll get to it, when we get into the plot. But Joan Cusack's character even has a dollhouse of the actual house, that's, exactly like that. So the production design is just top notch. You are not going to see another movie that looks like this.
Yeah, it has a very like fantasy dream-like setting to it, like it very out there, but in a way that felt very whimsical.
Yeah. Well, and that gets into, and you even see it kind of shift as the movie goes on, where, it starts off very brightly colored, and by the end of it, it is much darker, and showing that shift as things in the world change. And we'll talk more about, some of the symbolism and some of the other stuff I noticed that was really cool, on this watch through. But yeah, if nothing else, I would say, because I know people have a lot of mixed feelings on this, and I'm sure you guys have mixed feelings on this. Regardless of what else you think of the movie, it might be worth it to watch just for the production design. One of the other things that will stick with you from the movie, though, is the score and the soundtrack. The score was handled by the legendary Hans Zimmer, who many people know from his work with uh, like Christopher Nolan and huge blockbuster movies like that. Zimmer had started his career as a keyboardist in groups like the Buggles, the group behind early MTV hit Video Killed the Radio Star. He also eventually began producing music as well. The first movie he scored was actually Rain Man for Barry Levinson. For this project, he recruited his former Buggles bandmate, which is a bit of a tongue twister, Buggles bandmate, say that 5 times fast, Trevor Horn, to help with the soundtrack. Together, they created an assembly of musicians that added to the film's both dark and whimsical feelings. The soundtrack would feature songs from Anya, Tori Amos, and Thomas Dolby. Filming began on February 25th, 1992, and continued until late June. The film was shot primarily on the Fox lot in Los Angeles, with 50 to 60 sets taking up 5 stages, with exteriors being shot in Washington state. The final budget was estimated to be around $40 million, but was reduced to $30 million when Levinson, Williams, and one of the producers deferred their payment. This would be $40 million would be probably equivalent to between $80 and $120 million today. The film was being eyed by the studio to be a big hit, slotting into a holiday release slot with a major marketing blitz. It would be in over 1,200 theaters, a pretty big opening for the time period. The movie would premiere on December 18th, 1992.
If you're not familiar with Hans Zimmer, but you are familiar with the Buggles, this will completely throw off what you should be thinking Hans Zimmer is. It's really such a strange note to his career that he started that way.
I knew of both. I just never made the connection that Hans Zimmer was in any way connected to the Buggles.
Well, that's what I'm trying to say. It's such a huge disparity between, what he does, what 99.9% of what he has done versus that moment of time and culture, really.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And, Tori Amos, she was included on the soundtrack. I think her stuff was maybe done, like she was just getting big, like that year. Like Silent All These Years, I think, debuted in January of 92. So she was just starting to blow up.
Yeah, no, she's a big talent. I actually thought, I don't know when else to bring this up because it's not connected to a particular scene, but wasn't very happy with a lot of the music, actually. But the biggest thing I noticed was that editing-wise or audio editing-wise, there were many moments where they would play a song the way you would normally see a new song and a new scene to create, to help reinforce whatever the atmosphere and the meaning and the feelings behind it. But then like a few minutes later, they would come back to maybe that same room or another part of the scene, and they would continue with a song way longer than what is done nowadays. But just kind of, it felt uncomfortable. Like they kept on going to, this is the work song with the workers,
Well, but they would kind of remix that, like they had the opening version and then, where it's playing kind of normal, and then they're kind of doing the, hap, 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 happy work, or, like with the stuttering, skipping, like they're doing the record scratches. It's almost that, and that's, that's to go along with the changes you are seeing from when you first heard the song. Rob, that's one of those places we're going to have a difference of opinion, because the soundtrack is one of the things that also has stuck with me along with the production design. And so I like a number of the songs that are in there.
I was personally glad it wasn't a Christmas movie because we were recording this in October and this is spooky time for me. And I don't like Christmas in my spooky time. But there is that the opening scene is very Christmassy. And so I understand why they would put it where they did. But I think it's silly that it's considered a Christmas movie.
And it involves toys. And, the closing is also Christmassy. That's kind of the wrapper of, whereas the bulk of the actual story,
we can talk further about if we feel that fits when it comes.
Rob, Thomas Dolby is the blinded me with science
Oh yeah,
guy.
no, legit.
I love that song. I listen to it all the time.
Yeah, and someone else I didn't call out here who will make an appearance in the movie and on the soundtrack is are Wendy and Lisa, with Wendy actually making a physical appearance in the movie. Wendy and Lisa were part of Prince's band.
Now, if they had done the soundtrack.
Yeah. Let's get our tickets, buy some popcorn, and head on inside. It's time to talk about the film itself. Kristen, take us through the plot.
All right. So we were just talking about the Christmas pageant that kind of opens up this film, and spoiler alert, bookends it as well. So there's this Christmas pageant going on featuring the song called The Closing of the Year. And the scene ends with Santa Claus handing out toys for children in the program to play with. So it's kind of setting a vibe, setting a scene of like toys, whimsicalness. And the next thing we see is we get to meet the U.S. Army Lieutenant General Leland Zevo. He's the younger brother to Kenneth Zevo. So Leland, he arrives at Zevo Toys Factory, and so Kenneth, his brother, he's the CEO, and Leland is called there that day because Kenneth is dying, and he needs somebody to take over for him after he's passed for the factory. And instead of his son succeeding him, Kenneth decides that his younger brother is going to take over instead. And obviously Leland is surprised by this because they've kind of had a strained relationship. And also Owen Owens, we meet his assistant, who's also shook by this revelation that he's going to put his military brother in charge instead of his son that he's been kind of teaching for years. And obviously, besides the strained relationship, Leland is feeling weird because he doesn't really want to leave the military to take over this company, but he reluctantly agrees because it's his brother's dying wish. And so also in this section, we do get to see a moment of Kenneth's funeral and everybody gathering together. I also want to note that while Kenneth's son, Leslie is the name of his son, his adult son, mind you, that he's apprenticed at the toy factory most of his life, and his father acknowledges that Leslie loves toys, loves the work, but he thinks his childlike demeanor would jeopardize the company, and so that's why Kenneth has Leland take over, at least until Leslie is ready. So what did you guys think about like this introduction, the characters?
Kenneth actually dies on screen, or mostly, or starts to pass away as he's wrapping up the conversation with his brother. And he'd had his beanie, his propeller beanie, which he has on his head, apparently attached to his pacemaker. So as the propeller beanie slowly starts to stop spinning, that's an early warning sign that his heart is starting to fail. So you see him, the beanies start to slow down, and he starts to slump and try and get the propeller spinning, which, again, talking about dark humor, I found that hilarious.
Gee, Ken, I wonder why your son Leslie's such a goof. But yeah, if we're talking about silly parts, there's also a moment at the funeral that was so silly where they're all like trying to be somber and he's got a bunch of toys in his coffin and the barrel of laughs is in there. So there's just like this uncanny, creepy little laugh happening while they're all trying to be somber, and they have to they took it out to look at, but then they ultimately decided to keep it in there because it's what Dad would have wanted. But yeah, there's a lot of that like lighthearted kind of dark humor sprinkled in.
Yeah.
At this moment, the pacing is of a pace that if you're tired, you might just fall asleep.
Yeah. And you're kind of trying to figure out what in the world is like the purpose at this point, you know?
Well, and just what kind of movie did I get myself into? And we can
yes.
talk about like, especially how they marketed it. But I also liked the bit, like, because after after Kenneth dies, you actually go to the family home real quick, and you're introduced to Robin Williams playing the son Leslie and his sister Anastasia. played by
Joan Cussack.
Joan Cussack. Yes, thank you. And then as they're getting ready to head out, Owens asks, he tells him the limo is ready, and Robin goes, "I think I'd like to take Dad's car." And then you see him and Joan Cusack in between, regular normal cars, and they're in a bumper car. And again, just the.
And he hits the car in front of him, and he gets hit from the guy behind.
Yeah, it just kind of bounces back and forth. But they're doing it. They're not laughing. They're not selling it. They're doing it like this is completely normal way to get to a funeral.
Right.
Let me further help paint the picture. Lieutenant General Leland Zevo, we all know him. The whole world knows him because this is Dumbledore.
Yes, it
from
is.
Harry Potter. You know him from the Harry Potter films.
Dumbledore number 2 is the second one. The other one died. This one died eventually, but not during the.
Some other notable films of his include The Cook, The Thief, His Wife, and Her Lover, The Wings of the Dove, Gosford Park, The King's Speech, and Quartet. I didn't even say his real name. I just said Dumbledore. His name is Michael Gabon. He has a 6-decade-long career. What kind of awards are they called? Olivier Awards?
Olivier.
Excuse me, Olivier. And 4 BAFTA TV Awards. He was actually even knighted by Queen Elizabeth II for his services to drama. So this is a Sir Michael Gabon.
Yes. I think it's Gambon, but yes.
Yeah, well, and...
Yeah.
Well, it's Gabon if you're fancy.
If you're fancy.
Well, so one of the other things he was famous for, that there was a long-running car show on British television called Top Gear. And they had a segment for many years called A Star in a Reasonably Priced Car, where they would take various celebrities, like they would come on to the show and chat with them like it was a normal, the Tonight Show or something. But then, and that star could then promote, their latest project or whatever. But then they would take them out into like a, bottom range Kia or Toyota or whatever, and have them race around a racetrack and try and get the fastest times. And Michael Gambon had a very good time for the period he was in, but so dangerously took a corner on like 2 wheels that they ever after named it Gambon Corner.
That's awesome. And you know what? That kind of car racing is way more fun when it's two. I shouldn't say that. I was about to say a word I shouldn't say, but when it's 2 cars that are not a top-notch cars, like that's the most fun. Push it to the limit. See how they break.
I didn't even realize, or like when I was looking up like who was playing who, I could not believe that it was the same guy who was Dumbledore. In my head, I just couldn't fathom that it was the same guy because he's obviously so different in this. It's years before, well, not many years, but like a decade at least before the first ones that he appears in. But he had totally different vibe from anything I had ever seen him in for this.
Yeah, I know when it came to Kenneth, I don't know him. I don't know if you guys know him. His name was Donald O'Connor. He was, he's been around for a while, right? He was best known for Make 'Em Laugh dance routine in Singing in the Rain, 1952. He got a Golden Globe for that. He also rose to continued fame in a series of films that he co-starred in, Gloria Jean, Peggy Ryan, Francis the Talking Mule. Is that a series? Because I think there's more than one. I think there's a Francis series, right?
There's a whole bunch of them.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I think the Talking Mule was that particular one, but there's a whole series of Francis, I think.
Yeah. Well, Francis the Talking Mule is the character, and then it would be things like Francis Goes to West Point, or Francis, storms the Capitol, or whatever, his wacky adventures with the Talking Mule.
But I was not familiar with him at all. I guess he might be more of a. Is it the other side of the pond?
I guess
is that what it is?
I think like a classic star. I guess from like the era of like Singing in the Rain, the 50s. He came from this like vaudeville family, so he was big for the time. But I think by this point, I mean, obviously you can tell from the film, he plays a dying man, and he definitely looks very, very old. So so it's like, obviously this is a different point in his life than when he was like doing Singing in the Rain.
But I will say one thing that blew my mind: Donald O'Connor, Arthur Mallet, who played Owen Owens, who's a similar age, Jack Warden, who actually is fairly close, even though he plays the father of who we'll meet later, is also not that much older than him. All these actors who are supposed to be very, very old in the movie. And you guys know my father. Younger than my father now by a number of years. Most of these guys are under 70.
It's funny that you even mentioned this, because at one point I was trying to keep it together. What is this? What's going on in this movie? And I saw a bunch of old men on screen, and they all looked the same. And that's when I knew I had to pause and get myself together and like really pay attention to this, because I was starting to lose direction here. But
Rob, want to feel good about yourself? You're older than Michael Gambon was here.
That's insane.
Yeah. Just saying.
So you're saying I'm Dumbledore material?
Yes.
Yeah. No, you're
just grow a beard. You're on your way.
In like another 10 years, you'll be about the same age he was when he started playing Dumbledore.
Or you could play the younger version from the newer franchise.
Thank you, Kristen. The younger version. Thank you.
Yeah. No, but I'm just saying, people age different, But.
Yeah. So you mentioned Arthur Mallet, and his bio is also a very interesting one, because he's got Mary Poppins, but also like Halloween and Hook. He's got a very interesting filmography as well.
Well, and that he was in Hook, which was the Robin Williams movie that came out around Christmas, that is loosely tied to Christmas the year before. Because Hook also takes place during Christmas, but isn't a super Christmas movie.
Yeah, I don't consider that Christmas in my opinion. I didn't even remember there was a Christmas element at all.
Yeah, no, the whole thing technically takes place at Christmas. That's why they go back to visit Wendy Darling, who is played by Maggie Smith, another Harry Potter connection. Well, the older version is played by Maggie Smith. The younger version is played by Gwyneth Paltrow, before any of us knew who that was. That it's funny that, basically, Arthur and Robin Williams did these kind of two back-to-back movies.
Yeah.
What character was he in Young Frankenstein?
I don't know. I'd have to look it up I don't know off the top of my head. I can see he was in it, but like the big ones I know in that movie are obviously like Gene Wilder, Terry Garr, Cloris Leachman.
I don't remember Arthur Mallet in Young Frankenstein.
I'm guessing he's more of a bit player. He's either one of the townspeople or maybe something to do with
he's a village elder.
Okay. Yeah. So
more like on the side.
Oh, I think I know, actually. Okay. All right.
Yeah, I'm thinking it's in the scene. Kenneth Mars plays the very German guy who, they have to go up to the castle.
He's one of the guys who wants to take him down. Yeah.
Yeah, well, and so I think Arthur would be like that guy, Kenneth Mars' character, like bursts in on them as they're having a meeting, to talk about Dr. Frankenstein. And I'm thinking he's, one of the guys up at the table leading the meeting. So
Arthur Mallet, a man of many hats.
Yes. And unlike Kenneth Owens, none of them were keeping him alive.
Yep. You can't win them all. You cannot win them all. So obviously, moving on in the plot, now we've already passed Kenneth's funeral. Leland is taking his moment to try to take over the factory. And this is where we hear the song we were talking about earlier about Happy Worker by Tori Amos. And that is kind of playing over top the scene. He's kind of setting the vibe. This toy factory is full of like really fun looking machines that resemble toys themselves. Everyone's kind of dancing around while they work. Everyone's super happy working the factory line. And it's a very colorful set, very, very whimsical. And this is also where we get to see Kenneth's daughter, Alsatia, we met up briefly before the funeral, but now we kind of get to see her in her element. She designs and models clothes for the dolls by wearing them, but also like kind of working in this like house looking structure. So we kind of get to get a look into her, and then also a deeper look into Leslie, who walks into the office to speak to Leland in this smoking jacket, which is just a jacket that looks like it's smoke's coming out of it. And so this just kind of further shows his immaturity and silly personality to Leland, who is just like rolling his eyes at him basically. And we also have this scene where Leland goes to his father for advice on what to do. And his father, I mean, if Kenneth doesn't look like, looks like he's dying, it's the grandfather of Leslie and Alsatia is like even worse off. He doesn't really speak very much, or it's like he's an interesting figure. And so he goes to this man for his advice, and he also was in the military, and so they both have this conversation about how the military isn't what it used to be, and Leland feels that it's time he did something else, but he doesn't really feel like his heart is in running the factory. But he's like trying his best. He's like falling asleep in factory meetings. But then he hears about corporate secrets potentially being leaked. And he knows all about espionage and other military things. So he's like, I've got this. I'm going to take care of this. And so he hires his son, Patrick, who is a soldier with covert military experience, to manage security for the factory. And our introduction to Patrick is him stealthily hiding in couch cushions. He like pops out. He's he's blending in. He's a master of disguise.
That was actually the only laugh in the entire film for me, was when he
I also really
couch.
I thought
that was hilarious.
I forgot that it was LL Cool J. Yeah. I was like, what the hell? That's his son. Because I knew he was in it, but I didn't realize who he was. And then when that was the reveal, I was like, oh my God, LL Cool J is the son. That's hilarious.
And what's crazy about that is I think in that era, that was supposed to be the joke, first of all, that, LL Cool J, this black man, was his son of a white guy. Like that, I guess, was supposed to be the joke. But like nowadays,
I don't even think
funny.
I don't even think that was supposed to be a joke. I think they just cast, based on how they play it through the rest of the movie, that I think that was just, they decided he was the best person for the role and, went with it. Well, it's similar to like they make a comment, like one of the plot points, well, like it's like a throwaway line is like, damn you, daddy, for sticking me with this, cursed accent, by being stationed in England during my formative years. That sounds like a line you write to because you ended up casting a British actor in the role who can't do an American accent.
Yeah.
But it turns out like that's actually a plot point dating back to the 79 script. Jack Warden does look like he's dying here, but some of that is makeup because he actually looks healthier in The Replacements, a movie from 2000, than he does here,
Well, I was going to hold a second, but speaking of looking healthy and not, Robin Williams, I don't know. He's not looking too good in this movie to me personally. I think that he's looking like he's going through some things.
Yeah, well, he's again, talking about people aging different, like if you're just going by looks wise, Robin Williams doesn't look right for, like, even if you're saying the character's supposed to be immature, you're probably thinking someone who's more like, late 20s, early 30s, whereas Robin Williams is just about 40 here. So
it's not an age thing, though. It looks to me more like someone who doesn't get enough sleep, or maybe has some habits that are catching up to him.
I know what you're talking about, but some of it, like I was talking just about like the character, but at the same time, Robin Williams is in many ways the only person for this role, to pull off the, goofy with the Sweet and some of the other stuff. But yeah, it's I can see that he might not be looking at his best, but
it's kind of unclear how old he's supposed to be because he has that immature side to him. I
yeah,
was trying to figure out, is this man in his 30s? Is he in his 40s? Like, because like Robin Williams has a look about him that he's like, for me, he's kind of looked the same throughout all of the movies I've seen him in. So it's
yeah,
kind of hard to gauge like an age range. But yeah, I really think Robin Williams is such a fascinating character actor. I really like a lot of his work and what he's
hmm
done over the years. I mean, for a lot of it was my childhood. I mean,
hmm
Mrs. Doubtfire, Hook, Jumanji. He was really
yeah.
good in Jumanji.
Well,
Genie for Aladdin.
and we'll talk about Aladdin a bit more in part two because that comes up. But I would, especially Kristen, highly recommend you watch Good Morning Vietnam.
Mm-hmm.
That might be one of the best all-around performances he's done. I think this one is very, very good, but of being able to channel his improv while also showing off his emotional range.
Yeah.
Good Morning Vietnam is such a good showcase for that.
And in that movie, he doesn't look like he's acting. Like it just kind of, it flows very naturally. There are moments
Yeah.
of this film where you see Robin go into his on stage, his I'm a comedian mode at times, and for me it doesn't work. But
Yeah.
there's a different side of him altogether in Good Morning Vietnam that I think that you'll appreciate.
No, I like I said, for a lot of this, I can see, like, in some ways, it gets back to how insane that it was ever that this movie got made in the first place. Let alone that it was almost made several times before this. That it didn't just take Barry Levinson cashing in his blank check from being Barry Levinson to get it made, because it is. I can see how this is like almost a one percenter movie, where like it's only going to appeal to like 1%. It's maybe a little broader than that. Maybe it's like 20 or 30% of the audience is going to, really appreciate this movie, I think. And I think everybody else, it's just not going to be their cup of tea. And that's not to say that, 20% are wrong, are right, or that, other part, just aren't getting it. It's just, we all have different tastes, and sometimes you also just love that weird, strange things exist. But yeah, well,
One little item, real quick, you because you mentioned you only saw Robin Williams doing this, playing this role. I can see Martin Short, but anyways.
Yeah, no, I can see that. Well, and we talked a little bit about Jack Warden, who's you know, uh, super famous. He was in a lot of Warren Beatty movies like Shampoo and Heaven Can Wait. Heaven Can Wait is probably one of the ways I know him best. But he's also in like more serious things like 12 Angry Men and Sunset Boulevard. He was in a great episode of The Twilight Zone. I also know him from The Replacements, which is a Gene Hackman, Keanu Reeves movie from 2000, which is a lot of fun. And like I said, he also has one of the most, what you realize, especially if you put on, you guys weren't able to because of how you were watching it, which we won't talk about here, but I was able to have the subtitles turned on. And I already knew this because, again, I'd seen this many times before, but he has some really inappropriate jokes in his mumbling.
Yeah, I was able to get subtitles because I borrowed from the library, so
Okay.
I was privy to a couple of them. Something interesting I wanted to talk about with Jack Warden is that like he plays this old general, and he actually has like military experience himself, and him like deciding to become an actor happened around to the D-Day invasion. Mm-hmm. So he, like the eve of it, he shattered his leg after he landed in a tree during a nighttime practice jump in England. And then he spent 8 months in the hospital recuperating. And during that time, he read this Clifford Odette play and decided he wanted to become an actor after that. And so I thought that was an interesting tidbit that's worth talking about because it's very fascinating.
That's really cool. And yeah, because he's come up a couple times so far in this episode, even though he's not in this movie. You know who else was surprisingly a World War II veteran? having been involved in the Battle of the Bulge, which is a very famous long-running battle in World War II, is Mel Brooks.
Did not know that.
Yeah. And we haven't really talked about Joan Cussack yet. We think that she's worth discussing.
Oh yeah.
Well, yeah, I know. So you had 4 artist scripts in a row.
Yeah, it's a heavy-handed here in the beginning. We meet all of the characters within the first act, so there's a lot of them to talk about right here in the beginning.
Yeah. So Joan Cussack, and if you don't know her, she's the sister of John Cusack. If you don't know John, that's the brother of Joan.
Well, and there are a couple. There's Anne and a couple others, because like their parents were actors.
Yeah, no, the whole family.
And that's part of why they're also friends with Jeremy Piven, because Jeremy Piven's parents ran an acting class or something like it. They all grew up together.
So yeah, no, so we know her for a number of films and TV shows. I mean, one of the, if you're from the 80s or around in the 80s, you definitely know her from a number of influential films like 16 Candles, High Fidelity, Say Anything. Later on in her career, Addams Family Values, 9 Months, Cradle Will Rock. I didn't know she was in Looney Tunes Back in Action. I'm not too sure how important that was in her career, but it's a nice it's a nice item.
Apparently, folks know her from that.
She has won a number of awards, including one for comedy drama, A Working Girl, and a romantic comedy called In and Out. Most of her TV roles have been in Shameless, The Office, and a series of Unfortunate Events. She definitely has a face you will recognize.
Oh yeah.
Well,
she was also in Toy Story 2, at least. She was the voice of Jessie the cowgirl.
Nice.
She's such a fun character in Shameless. So like crazy in that one. So it's like anytime I see Joan Cusack, I immediately think of her character in Shameless. You see them in one specific role. But yeah, her also in Addams Family Values is really good. I love her as Debbie.
Yeah, I mean, we could list her credits all day, and she's awesome.
She's unhinged.
Everything.
Like she plays unhinged characters so well.
Yeah,
little weirdos.
Yeah, but she's awesome. And Rob, I think for this last one, especially given your background, you're probably the best person to talk about.
I wasn't sure. So we had already started talking about LL Cool J, coming out the couch and everything. But I mean, be a little surprised if you don't know who LL Cool J is, but he is a music artist, a rapper an actor who started in the 80s, the late 80s, one of the first of the golden era to really find commercial success, the golden era of hip hop. Think Run DMC and Public Enemy and other artists that you would see on Def Jam Records. One of the first times you see him on film is a influential hip hop film called Crush Groove, where he especially in the scene where he kind of reimagined how he was signed to Def Jam. He's a 2-time Grammy Award winner, many hits. I'm Bad, Mama Said Knock You Out, Doing It, Hey Lover. He's filmed he's been in a number of films outside of toys, including Halloween, H2O. What is H2O? Is that Halloween?
That's
20?
just the subtitle. Yeah,
it's H2O. Yeah,
I don't know that one. In Too Deep and Any Given Sunday, Deep Blue Sea, and SWAT. He also played NCIS Special Agent Sam Hanna in the CBS crime drama TV series NCIS Los Angeles and NCIS Hawaii.
Yeah, exactly. Which means he's more than anything. Those have probably paid him far more than he's made on any of the other things he's ever done in his career, sadly.
And Adam has been paying close attention to the size of his head since the 80s till now. So what would you like to say about that, Adam?
I'm not legally going to say anything. Just because I like not getting sued. Just, sometimes there are reasons people's head shape changes as they get more into certain activities.
But I don't know. I can't speak on his head size in any capacity, but I did really like him in Halloween H2O. So Rob, if you weren't familiar, it's supposed to be like a 20 years later that's supposed to take place after Halloween 2. There are like 5 timelines in the Halloween franchises. And so this is like this one-off one. Kevin Williamson is involved. So it has a very like Scream vibe. It does not feel like a Halloween movie.
Well, it's crazy because I saw H2O, but then I was like, wait, I know there's a lot of Halloween films. Maybe this is literally the 20th one.
Yeah, no, it was
not quite that
far. 20th anniversary, so it came out in like 98. I think it was the first time Jamie Lee came back.
Well, after 2 at least. Yeah.
Yeah, no, but that's what I mean. It's like after her initial time in it. So it was the first time in nearly 20 years she'd been back in the franchise as well.
But basically, LL Cool J, he is the security guard who is a aspiring writer, and he's trying to write a romance novel, and he's reading them to his girlfriend in the like booth, and it's really silly. Yeah. I love him in that movie. Yeah. It's so funny.
Well, and Deep Blue Sea is just a fun movie. And then there was also a short-lived, I think it initially started on NBC and then briefly moved to UPN. He had a sitcom called like Man of the House or something, where he played a former running back who becomes a landlord, like starts renting out part of his house or his guest house to a single mom or something and her kids. It was fun.
Yeah.
So what is it? 4 decades later? Where are we here? He just dropped an album recently, and
yeah.
It's pretty good. I mean, I didn't want to like it, and what I heard was, and I don't mean that any kind of way. I just didn't want to be the old guy like an old hip hop head, right? But it's actually pretty good. So
yeah, that's good. He still got it.
Yeah. And we already talked a lot about Robin Williams. I don't think most people are going to know who he is. I don't think we have to talk about him too much more, other than for me to just say that he was one of my biggest heroes, inspirations, people I wanted to be like when I was growing up. That I, in many ways, wanted to go to the same college he did. For various reasons, did not. But he was. So I was always eager to see anything he was in, which is, again, part of why, I was watching Good Morning Vietnam as like an 8 or 9-year-old.
Right.
So,
no, he's one of the greatest ever. I mean, there's no doubt about it. What a tragedy.
Yeah. But
absolutely.
Well, I think we've gotten quite a bit ways into the movie, but we still got a lot more to go. Can Leslie grow up and become the man he needs to be to help save the company? Will he overcome his uncle's sinister machinations? And what happened to Barry's friend George? Find out the answers to all these questions and more when we come back for part 2. Until then, thanks so much to our editor Javi and the entire Savage Content team. Thanks so much to my co-hosts Rob and Kristen. Thanks so much to our sponsor, No Regrets, the spirit and music of Billie Holiday. And most importantly, thanks so much to all of you for listening. Please give us 5 stars, leave us a review wherever you get your podcasts. If you are watching on YouTube, give us a like, a follow, ring the bell, drop into the comments, all the good YouTube things. I've been your host, Adam, and we'll see you next time on the Savage Movie Night Podcast.